We should be live. I see it all looking like we're going live. And we're going to see some comments soon. I've titled this episode Microdosing GIGACHADS.
GigaChad. Yeah, baby. Michael Saylor. I got my Michael Saylor shirt on. The GigaChad Saylor's shirt.
Wow.
Got it.
So I'm going to open up the computer so I can go over to the YouTube here and watch your comments coming in live. And I'm also going to open up my script, which I had printed out, but I don't know where I put it. It's over here. Right. So, the reason why it's called Microdosing GigaChads this episode is that Michael Saylor is back in the news. We know that he bought $420 million worth of Bitcoin for MicroStrategy, his company, which is an S&P 500 company that was announced a few weeks ago. And I guess he's up about 80 million or 70 million on that, which is apparently made his shareholders very happy. But today he tweeted out this, Max. Some have asked how much Bitcoin I own. I personally hodl 17,732 Bitcoin, which I bought at about $9,882 each on average. I informed MicroStrategy of these holdings before the company decided to buy Bitcoin for itself. What do you think of that, Max?
Well, it's the rabbit hole. Once people start buying Bitcoin, then they start actually diving into the rabbit hole even more. And the case to buy more becomes even more compelling. Same thing over with that guy in the Cayman Islands, who's been buying lots and lots of Bitcoin. Not Mart Saul. What's his name?
Raoul Powell.
Raoul
his
Powell.
name is.
Raoul Powell. He's been buying lots of Bitcoin for years now, and he keeps. Once you start buying, you can't stop buying because the macro situation against which you're buying is continuously deteriorating. Like it's just getting worse and worse. Gold is now being left in the dust, really, against Bitcoin. In a big way. And that's just the relative strength of Bitcoin is just powering ahead of everything, including gold at this point. It's not even close anymore.
Well, I guess they say never fall in love with your investments because I've seen that sort of commentary happening on Twitter from our friends over there. Not only like Peter Schiff, but also Ned Naylor Leyland, who's a big silver and gold bug. But he's been dissing all these people like Raoul Powell, who mentions that Raoul Powell said that that Bitcoin is a black hole. He picked up on a metaphor that Max created, a couple, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And he's running with that. And he's saying that, Raoul Powell, who is a former, I guess he was at Goldman Sachs, but and now he's a hedge fund manager. And he's saying like there's no single investment in his life that is as good as this, even now at this price. Paul Tudor Jones also just said this past week that Bitcoin at 13,000 is more interesting to him than it was at 5,000 whenever he was buying back in March futures contracts. So, into that mix, you have these gold bugs who are getting more and more angry. And then, of course, JP Morgan themselves, very active in the precious metals markets, not as a positive influence, you might say. But they came out this past week and said that, well, millennials clearly for our customers, we're looking at the data and they clearly prefer Bitcoin to gold. And therefore, we see at a conservative guess, they see 3x of Bitcoin from these prices at 13,000. So I guess they're predicting up to 66,000. But they think that it could go up to 50x with to match the quantity of gold, the size of the gold market.
Yeah, and you saw in Siberia this past week a huge gold discovery. So that whole stock to flow argument, that the fact is gold is not absolutely scarce. It's not absolutely finite. There's at least 2% or so of new gold every year. And the point has been made that gold market, like the natural gas market, if the price of gold starts to go up a lot, then technology will advance and you'll start getting more gold pulled out of the earth. And it's got an inflation problem when you compare it to Bitcoin. So gold's inflation was low, and it's a commodity that's scarce, but it's not absolutely scarce. And with Bitcoin, it's absolutely secure and it's unconfiscatable. And, there's an element of reflexivity here, as George Soros wrote about in his book, The Alchemy of Finance, that markets are self-fulfilling prophecies in a lot of ways. In the case of money, what makes money, it's entirely subjective and it's up to the market. The market decided that gold was money for many years. Then the state said has said over many instances that paper money is gold according to the money according to the state. That has never worked out, by the way. And the market said, okay, Bitcoin is money. And for a few years, people doubted it. But now, as people are buying it at the 100 to half a billion, 100 million, half a billion at a clip, I mean, he literally called down the over-the-counter desk and bought $250 million of Bitcoin in one trade. I mean, that's a nice order. Whoever got that order on the other side, although transaction fees are quite low anyway. So that's it becomes what it is. So people, they're using it as a store of wealth, and against the backdrop, the state has nothing to offer. They're just printing more. They're not going to stop printing. Modern monetary theory is a hoax. Fiat money is a hoax. The train has left the station. That's why I think you get over 14,000, and there's not a lot of supply between 14,000 and 28,000, in my view.
Right. Like, let's talk about that notion of running out of Bitcoin. We're running out of Bitcoin because of the GigaChads. Over the past few years, we've seen people like Pierre Rochard is always saying, like, there's, say, 200 million millionaires in the world, and there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So every millionaire out there cannot even own one Bitcoin. So, I mean, obviously, they're just like playing with the data and the facts and the numbers. And, theoretically, there is always Bitcoin for you at a certain price, right? Like, if somebody's willing to, if it goes to, $1.7 million, it might take some people to get to that price before, GigaChad Michael Saylor is willing to part with some of his 17,732 Bitcoin he bought. But, like, let's point this out, which Psychedelic El Barto, he said, Michael Saylor calls an OTC desk. OTC desk. Hello, Mr. Saylor. How many Bitcoin would you like to buy today? Saylor. All of it.
Right. There's a lot more people that are going to be making that call and buying every available Bitcoin that they can lay their hands on. And so that means that liquidity is going to be a problem for a lot of folks trying to buy Bitcoin. There won't be any Bitcoin around. Not at, you might have a break in the market where, well, I don't know, maybe not. But the fact is that liquidity can be an issue, because especially if the big wholesale buyers are buying it directly from the miners, and it just doesn't go into the retail market. So the price, of course, would be a lot higher. But even if you could get it, the price could be at 50,000 a Bitcoin, but it may be really, really hard for people to find any to buy, because all the output's going directly to the institutional market, and nobody's selling.
Right. So that's why we keep on advising you to stack just daily cost average while you can. And if you go to swanbitcoin.com/Kaiser, Keiser, if you are unable to spell Kaiser, you could also go to swanbitcoin.com/max, and you spell that MAX. And so you go there and you start stacking Bitcoin. That's what you got to do. And, we always say, okay, maybe you're not going to be able to buy 17,732, but, 17,000 Satoshis, that puts you in the same room as Michael Saylor. That makes you just as much, maybe the right word isn't GigaChad, but it still makes you Chad, right?
Yeah, you still are Chad with 17 Satoshis. And any amount of Satoshis, it just fundamentally changes the way you think. So with Michael Saylor, remember in 2013, he rejected Bitcoin and he thought it was terrible. And the price was less than $100 a coin, and he thought it was a shitcoin. And it wasn't until the SegWit battles of 2017 and the failure of Bitcoin Cash did he realize that, in fact, this was the runaway freight train that would never be duplicated. He points out that once a technology reaches 100 billion in market cap, it tends to leave everything else behind. And he has an incredible amount of things to say about why. Bitcoin is doesn't have any competition and will never have any competition. So then at around 9,000, 10,000, think about that. He missed it from 100 to 10,000. He buys it at 10,000 and now he's already up $100 million. And that all happened in 1 year. So shouldn't be discouraged about buying it at 13 or 14,000 because we're going to go to 140,000, 240,000, 500,000 and beyond. You just got to get on the bus here. You just got to start
Get on the
sacking.
rocket.
Start sacking sats. Just get on the bus and let daily cost averaging work for you. Let Bitcoin work for you, and that's what you got to do.
I'd like to read some of the comments. I'm just going to read the comments about me.
All right.
Stacy looks so young these days. Could pass for Max's daughter today. Laughing out loud. I think it's just my, this is the sort of shirt I used to wear as a child. As some of you may know, we had the electricity all in the entire area went out, and the electric company was saying it wasn't going to go back on until about 2:30, 2:45. And so I didn't bother getting ready, like brushing my hair or anything. So then the electricity came back on with 15 minutes to go before this live stream. So I was like, blah. I'm going to just put on my, basically my pajamas.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I like that shirt. It's very nice. It's got like a farm girl vibe, as far as I can tell. That's always a nice vibe.
And then somebody asked me why I don't have my drink and where is it? And that is not here because this is the microdose. And on top of that, we're doing an interview for Kaiser Report with Kyle Bass in a bit, and that will air on election day. We're recording it kind of early because, those sort of big names, in the past, I just don't trust them to actually show up. And, I like to have a lot of leeway between their airing and the recording, because just in case we need to scramble and find another guest or whatever. So just to be safe, to be anti-fragile, I make sure.
Yeah, exactly. Good idea. We got to be prepared for any outcome, for sure.
Right.
And I've got my coffee.
That's just as good for Max. That's like several hits of several lines of crystal meth. That's enough,
Yeah, I've trained my body to respond to iced coffee the way most people respond to crystal meth.
I get it. I kind of do. Right. So what else? Well, Joe Rogan's been in the news because we've been talking a lot about deplatforming and censorship. And I know Jack Dorsey was speaking to some sort of congressional committee today, or Senate committee, about, that Section 230 thing that exempts them from libel. And so they were being questioned about, their bias against Republican content. Certainly they blocked all this content about Hunter Biden. I haven't really had any time to go into it, but from what I've seen, that is able to break through the barriers of censorship. It does seem pretty bad, all the stuff that Hunter Biden was doing. It seems like this is a kind of theme with a lot of our presidents. Jimmy Carter had a bum brother, didn't he? And Bill Clinton had a bum brother, and Hillary Rodham Clinton's brother was also a bum. And there's always this member of the family that's like,
oh, yeah, Billy Carter was a bit of a loser. I don't believe he was an arms dealer, though.
Well, no, because this is the level of the corruption. And it's just, to me, it's really kind of sad, because you just look at the comments and you see how it happens. You see how that Bastiat quote happens with a two-party system. So you see, okay, it's like all this like shocking stuff about Hunter Biden. And it's way worse than any of the shocking stuff about Eric or Don Jr. that has emerged over the past 4 years. But every time you say like, oh, here, this is what Hunter Biden did, some arms deal or dealing with the chief of secret police in China or whatever, he's doing, it's like, now do the Trump sons. And it's like, okay, I see, like, it's okay as long as it's our side. What about your side? So, that happens, whatever. But Joe Rogan, he's a podcaster like us, right? And he was inspired. How did he get into podcasting? Who was he inspired by? Alex Jones. Well, Alex Jones, is banned from Spotify, also banned and deplatformed from YouTube. But Joe Rogan did something yesterday where he had Alex Jones on live. So seemingly like a taunt to all those snowflakes that work at Spotify who wrote this letter to the CEO saying they feel unsafe because of Joe Rogan there. So he interviewed Alex Jones, and who did he just interviewed somebody else like 2 or 3 days ago that was also quite controversial. So he's obviously looking perhaps to get fired. Maybe that like it's a good way to get his freedom back, but also collect the 100 million.
No, I don't think he's going to get fired. I mean, he got 1 million views in like 10 hours. He's doing his job. He's engaging folks. I don't, I mean, Alex Jones. Don't understand why ban Alex Jones because I listen to Alex Jones and sometimes he says things that are quite funny. I've been on his show many many times over the years, and I don't feel like that Alex Jones has the ability to somehow mesmerize me in a way that I'm incapacitated and I've lost all my agency, self ability to think anymore. And it's some kind of right. He's just he's a podcasting guy, and it makes it. There's no reason to ban Alex Jones except in terms of that was the beginning of a lot of banning. As we said once Alex Jones gets banned then a lot of people would get banned. So he was kind of holding the fort against this censorship. And sure enough, they went ahead and they mass banned people and deplatformed people, and without any justification whatsoever, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean that's the single issue that I'm most concerned about from a Biden administration is the authoritarian left, like starting to deplatform a lot of people. But I think you're right. Is like, I mean, I listen and read all sorts of content, and I, sometimes go, oh, that person's bonkers, or that idea
Mm-hmm.
sounds dumb, and well, their ideology sounds stupid. Like I read MMT stuff. I don't. It's not brainwashing me. Every time I read an article, you know what I do when I read something about MMT? Stack some sats. Go to swampbitcoin.com and smash some buy orders. Yeah, swampbitcoin.com/max.
Yeah, it reminds me of this film Forrest Gump. Remember Forrest Gump? It's a story of a man who got like below average intelligence, but he's well-meaning and he makes a lot of mistakes. But he ends up as the biggest shrimp boater in the Gulf. He ends up owning a lot of Apple stock. He ends up becoming a hero because his intentions are good. And in America, you can make mistakes and you can try again. Not so much in Europe. Europe is a place where if you make a mistake, your career is finished pretty much. They don't have that culture of my trajectory towards success begins with a mistake, which you have here in the United States. And so if you take that away by being ultra censoring of everybody, and if you make a mistake or you made a mistake 20 years ago, you're deplatformed, then you're no longer America. You are now Germany or France or the United Kingdom, right? So you're no longer availing yourself to what America has to offer. So Alex Jones is an American archetype. Donald Trump is an American archetype, just like Mark Twain or Colonel Sanders or you just go down the list. It's just like this is America. If we're gonna just deplatform people for being stupid, then there's going to be no internet discovery, no man on the moon, no victory in World War II, no nothing. It's nothing left, really. The only thing we have left is our ability to be stupid. Take that away, be stupid without penalty. If you take that away, then you're just going to be a bureaucrat in France sitting around arguing all day about foie gras. Worthless.
Well, somebody says that it's coming through. The audio is coming through the camera, but it says it's coming through here. So I don't know. I don't know why that would be. Yeah, it's all plugged in. It should be coming through here, but and it says you see the big the level thing going up there, the green button. It says it's going through there.
Right. I'm not going to deplatform that person for making an incorrect
No,
comment.
two people
because
saying
this is America, right? So I shouldn't just say, hey, you need to be banished from the internet because you're being dumb. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, hey, you're entitled to your dumb opinion, it
Oh.
doesn't make any difference, right?
I'm going to go
Because
through
this
there.
is America.
No, they're allowed on the internet, but they're never allowed on YouTube again. So people are saying
They
that
get deplatformed.
they're disagreeing with the guy and saying that in fact the
Right.
audio is fine. So I will go through there when I'm done with this and look and ban that person from our channel again.
Well, that's what
Just so
they
you
do
know.
in France. They would be banned in France or banned in the United Kingdom. But in
No,
America, they would be like, oh, you know, you made a dumb mistake. We don't care. Try again.
no. The way the free speech works is this is our channel. Our Telegram group, Orange Pill Pod, is our channel. We invite you into our home, into our community, into our group, into our living room. That is the Telegram group. That is our YouTube channel. And if you say boneheaded stuff, we decide to ask you to leave. We first ask you to leave. And if you don't leave, then we just ban you from the group. You are still, you yourself can start your own YouTube channel. You yourself can start your own Telegram group. And you could go, you know, you're free to do that. That's your freedom of speech. You know, your freedom of speech doesn't mean that I have to listen to you, right?
Yeah, that's darn right. And those are good guidelines. Keep that in mind in the
Don't be
Telegram group.
dumb.
I guess on the group, that's it.
So yeah, the other person that Joe Rogan interviewed was, you know, I got sidetracked by
Yeah, exactly.
this whole fake argument
Oh
about
my God.
it was
Do you
fake
want me to
news.
say that again?
It was fake news.
What was the question? Something about Joe Rogan.
No, Joe Rogan. It was Kanye West. He had Kanye West on, which I mean, okay, he was on for like 3 hours, but the one issue is that he's bipolar and he seems to be going through some sort of mental health problem. And it was like rambling stream of consciousness, and people were complaining about that. But he did mention Bitcoin, and he said that it was the only instrument for liberation in America.
Right, that's right. That's what we've been talking to Sinclair Skinner for many years. Bitcoin J over there, the author,
Bitcoin Zay,
Zaya Jackson, and that Bitcoin is a path for freedom and emancipation for Black Americans and every American who wants to be free. And that's you know, he's right. Kanye West is absolutely correct. Kanye, good on you, matey.
I don't know if he's a gigachad yet, but he's a sort. I mean, you have to respect that. Okay. Now, I argued this week on Twitter. I said that the most gigachad of all was Abigail Johnson, who is a multi-billionaire, and she is the CEO of Fidelity Bank, which is a massive bank in America, investment bank in America. They are private, so there's not much disclosure that they have to do to tell you how much Bitcoin they own. For example, they've been mining Bitcoin since 2014. We know that they've publicly disclosed that information. We don't know how much Bitcoin they've mined in that time, but they haven't sold any of it, so it's still there. She got in 2014 in the context of a very hostile environment to Bitcoin back in 2014. The Senate was holding hearings about the terrorist financing with Bitcoin. The Silk Road had just been seized. Jamie Dimon was calling it terrorist financing and all that
Mt. Gox
stuff.
collapsed.
Mt. Gox collapsed. So, that was the context of it, where she had the courage, the balls to step forward into that mix. And Bitcoin was under $1,000 at that point. So she stepped into that, and was willing to brave going into Bitcoin. Now, she herself is worth several $billion too. So I don't know how much she personally owns, and she hasn't disclosed it. But this GigaChad movement, this is Michael Saylor. I mean, those are pretty bold moves, right? This isn't just half-hearted. This is just like.
Well, I mean, it's all on what scale. I mean, he for $250 million for Michael Saylor would be like $250 for somebody else, right? It's just a matter of scale and how many zeros you have at the end of your bank account. But the intention is the same, right? And also, it's a matter of risk and analyzing risk. And the risk of not owning Bitcoin is higher than the risk of owning Bitcoin. And that's what's driving so many to Bitcoin, because the risk of being in fiat money and the risk even of being in gold and silver at this point is too high compared to being in Bitcoin. So people who are risk averse are going into Bitcoin. And the volatility issue is a non-issue. It's a foolish issue. You still see that in the mainstream press as being somehow an issue, but the volatility is the trade-off for unconfiscatable, censorable, immunity. All the
Immunity.
attributes. Immunity.
It gives you immunity from
Gives
COVID-19.
you immunity. All these factors are the trade-off. So, are you willing to accept a little volatility to have perfect money, perfect price discovery, perfect hedge against disaster? I mean, yeah, right. So, it's just the time. This is it. Once it gets over 1400, there's just not a lot of supply. There's just not enough. There's just not a lot of supply to fill that market. So you're going to see a pretty fast move to 28,000.
Yeah. So I think that's what he's looking at it. And, but I get it all the time in DMs, on Twitter and emails, people just getting into Bitcoin over the last few months. They were asking me at 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, is it going to dip? Okay, should I wait for a dip? Should I wait for a dip? And it's like, well, no, because it's never been a good time to wait for a dip. Obviously, if you had some cash still available, not to go all in, to still have some cash should it dip, like it did, say in March, down to 4,000 or 5,000. So to be able to buy at those opportunities, because Bitcoin is pretty good at delivering those brilliant prices, mostly because of the exchanges. So that price in March was a lot to do with BitMEX. There was a spiral of algorithmic selling.
Same thing with Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox, there was a huge collapse. It blew up. BitMEX had a problem. There was a price fell pretty dramatically. And that is a function of the exchanges. But the maturity of the exchange business has grown a lot.
Yeah.
And, as the price goes higher and more big players are involved, there's going to be less volatility and less problems. And, by the time Bitcoin will be one of the least volatile assets in the world when it gets over 100,000 per coin. But I think you'd rather own it now at 13 to 14,000 before it gets to 100,000 and accept the volatility. Or do you want to wait to 100,000 where it's going to be less volatile, but you miss the entire move?
Where should I buy Bitcoin? Coinbase is expensive. Don't use Coinbase. How many times do we have to tell you not to use Coinbase? Right. And, the one argument people have had was use Swan. SwanBitcoin.com/max. And the thing about it is, there was some legitimate problem for people in New York where they were unable to use SwanBitcoin.com/max. But now you can use it because they're open to New Yorkers. So right. They are able to offer it to SwanBitcoin.com.
Use Swan.
Oh, that's pretty.
The disco version. Hi, my name is Corey over at Swan. Everything at Swan is Bitcoin maximalist. You can't go wrong at Swan. It's dollar cost averaging. SwanBitcoin.com/max. You get $10 worth of Bitcoin for free. Gee, Corey, you got a kind of a cough there, buddy. You feeling okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm doing fine.
Swan Bitcoin. Somebody wants me to provide a link. Okay.
This, by the way, is not a swan. This is a
pink flamingo,
this
honey.
Is a flamingo. Pink flamingo? That's right. That's what that is.
There. I put a link into the comments. You could use that to go visit it. Okay. There's KYC on any, if you need to convert your dirty fiat into Bitcoin, well, the fiat shitcoiner, the master shitcoiner of US dollar is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. So Jay Powell and Steve Mnuchin want your information. So you've got to do that. And by the way, speaking of the US Treasury, they're open to, they're inviting comment on their plans to, oh my God, the travel rule to change the FinCEN laws. So right now, if any American were to send $3,000 or above overseas, it has to be reported to officials because it's suspect, right?
Yeah.
It's very suspicious, very Soviet-like. Who are these people talking to overseas? We must investigate them. Well, now they want to reduce that number to $250. We're going to have Preston Byrne on to talk about that on Kaiser Report in about a week. But yeah, so you have to use KYC on swanbitcoin.com/Kaiser or /max. And all pretty much all exchanges are like that. If you're in the UK or Europe, you can use coinfloor.co.uk /max, and that's across Europe. And otherwise, yeah, you have to use DeFi, which I think you can go in and out of crypto, but we don't use that, so I can't recommend any. I don't know what they are. Let's see. River Financial. I hear they're good, but we are investors ourselves in swanbitcoin.com /Kaiser. But I hear River Financial is good too, and I know some of those people. 3,000. It used to be 5,250. Laughing my ass off. Yeah, I know. It's so stupid. Like, to be American is, back in the Roman Empire, they went similarly crazy like we did. And it's partly to do with the water, right? They had lead in the water. We have lead in the water.
Yep.
They elected, the people chose bread and circuses eventually, and they liked deranged lunatic emperors. They were often very popular, and the more war the emperor took them to, often they were more celebrated by the masses. Of course, the aristocrats, the senators, and all the wealthy people of Rome never liked the emperor going to war if it cost them.
Yeah, the emperors would get killed off quite frequently, and I think that was kind of one of the trade-offs. Is like the poor people are like, "Well, we're not the emperor; we don't get to live in the palace." But then again, we're not going to get murdered today either.
Yeah. So, what they did, oh, yeah, and how they got people to pay taxes is if you were not a Roman citizen, if you didn't pay taxes, you weren't a Roman citizen. And if you weren't a Roman citizen, you could be enslaved. So a Roman citizen couldn't be a slave. So that's how they got them to do it. But, there were benefits. You weren't enslaved. American empire is just like, you're a slave. Everybody else in the world is free. Like, people who are come here to work, even. Like, I had friends in the UK who were like, they wrote like Ali G. They could come here and write Ali G and not have to be a slave. They get to get paid and then get to pay the 19% LLC, the corporate tax rate in the UK, and not have to be a slave like here. So, and they could actually live in Portugal or Malta and not pay taxes anywhere, right?
Yeah, the U.S. is it's a horrible tax situation in the U.S. The only thing good about it, as we mentioned before, is that the speech laws are, relatively speaking, the best in the world. It's better than the UK or anywhere in Europe or Asia, Middle East, etc., Latin America. The U.S. still has the best speech laws, so that's worth something. I'm not sure it's worth the amount of taxes one pays, but it's definitely worth not being in a no speech, free speech zone like the United Kingdom and other places.
But it's beyond taxes. What I'm talking about is you have no freedom to even send more than $250 overseas without being surveyed. You have no freedom to even. It's very difficult to open a bank account overseas if you have an American passport, because uniquely the American government has the ability to incarcerate anybody else in the world.
If you unpack that a little bit, so JP Morgan got caught, busted, doing a lot of evil stuff, and they paid billions and billions in fines.
Yeah.
So they are upset about the inconvenience of paying those fines. So they get Congress to pass laws to punish the people, because they blame the people for having to suffer the inconvenience of being dragged in front of the courts and being made to pay fines. So it's a form of collective punishment. So Jamie Dimon is like, look, I'm so tired of having to pay these fines. Just print the money, give it to me, and shut up. And the fact that you're even putting me through the exercise of having to give back 20 or 30 cents of every dollar I steal, I find that horribly inconvenient. So I'm going to lobby the Congress to pass new restrictions and rules to collectively punish everyone in America now, because I hate Americans and I hate humanity. That's Jamie Dimon. It's Jamie Dimon's fault. Now, Bitcoin is the anti-Jamie Dimon, and when we have enough, like Michael Saylor or these other gigachads, when they can start buying congressmen and buying senators and buying presidents, then we'll get the laws we need to achieve the freedom we want. It's only a matter of a few months, I think, at this rate. If Bitcoin goes $100,000, I think half of Congress will be in the pocket of the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, sure. If there's if Biden becomes president, Hunter Biden is looking for some cash. If you have a few Bitcoin for him and are willing to give it to him in order to change, get his dad to change some laws, executive orders like overruling these travel rules, that would be a good one. So, like we have 5 more minutes. Let's see. Any comments or questions? Add that to the comment section here. I think it looks pretty good today. The quality of the video is looking good. We're gonna search and destroy that person who complained about the audio, but I'm going to post the audio as a podcast, by the way, to our buzzsprout.com/orange pill. I'm gonna put that title here in your chat room. Any final thoughts, Max? What do you, gold has had a bad day so far, and I see the miners were down pretty big.
Right. Gold's had a problem for years, and it doesn't have great free price discovery like Bitcoin does. And now the market's starting to embrace Bitcoin over gold. So now gold has another big problem, and that is that big players are favoring Bitcoin over gold. So that means less buyers in gold. And that's, if you look at it, another way, of course, is that the US dollar has had a big rally today, and gold and the dollar are mutually, they go in the opposite direction. And I would imagine the dollar's having a big day as a flight to safety because one, COVID-19 is
Mm,
spiking around the world.
yes.
Two, emerging markets like Turkey, the Turkish lira is crashing to all-time lows against the dollar. So
Yeah.
there's a big flight to US dollars, and to the entire emerging market complex of other emerging market economies, they follow suit and they go and they buy the dollar as a safety trade. And you add that up and you see the dollar spike, and that's always a negative for gold. And but Bitcoin is breaking away from the pack. Bitcoin less and less is sensitive to dollar weakness, and it's not correlated with anything. It never has been. Bitcoin's never been correlated with anything but Bitcoin. Obviously, if something's up 100,000%, it's not correlated to anything. Anyone who makes these arguments that it's correlated to the stock market or whatever, that makes no sense. So that's the dollar. The problem is the dollar, as always. And even though the dollar is the currency of the global prison planet, people in other countries haven't completely figured out a way to escape the dollar's embrace. So as long as the U.S. can create havoc, there's going to be a flight to the dollar, and that's a negative for gold. And the only path out, the only vector out of this mess would be the Bitcoin vector.
Right. And, you mentioned that the European numbers on COVID-19 are pretty extreme. And I mean, this is the thing why we try to remain just nonpartisan. We try as hard as possible to stay, outside status quo thinking and try to be heterodox thinkers, or at least if interview people that are known heterodox thinkers and think outside the mainstream. It's, because in America, it's the mainstream media essentially says that we have a fascist dictator, very similar to Hitler. And because of that, we have high numbers here. And for the most part, the mainstream media and the corporate Democrats love European leaders, right? They love Merkel, they love Macron, they love, continental European sort of sophistication. To them, they see them all as very sophisticated and how they like to eat and live and work in Manhattan and stuff. So when the numbers in Europe are way higher than here by twice as much, you ask, like, well, where are the fascist dictators there? And if they don't have fascist dictators, then how come their numbers are high? Is there a different reason for this? Is there a different, you know, commonality that is shared amongst the US and Europe in terms of like why the numbers are so high compared to Thailand, which is way, way down here? And obviously,
Right,
like,
that's the question you have to ask yourself. What is Thailand doing right? And a couple of countries, what are they doing right, and how are they doing it right? And then contrast it to the U.S. So that's the question. I mean, there's a global pandemic, and it affects different countries in different ways. So a logical conversation would be, well, let's look at these countries and compare and contrast and see what they're doing. Maybe what Thailand is doing is unacceptable in the U.S., and
Yes.
that would be a conscious decision, though. We should say, look, we're willing to accept the consequences of not doing it this way or not doing it the Chinese way. And that's what we want to do. And these are the acceptable consequences. When you go to war, you send thousands of men to the front line and many of them will die. And you say, well, I'm accepting the consequences because I believe we need to be in this war. There's a global pandemic. It's just making a move against people all over the world, and America has a response, and that response could be in a few different ways, and you make a trade-off and how you want to approach it. There's going to be a sacrifice of some type. The left seems to be in this bubble where nobody ever has to make a sacrifice. And that seems to be the motivation for MMT, right? Modern monetary theory is that, well, actually, nobody has to make a sacrifice because you can just print money indefinitely. It'll never cause inflation and never cause a problem because us geniuses who are printing all the money will figure out how to deal with that when it happens. And, the fact that we've never been able to deal with it ever in history and it's never worked ever, we're not going to, highlight that fact at all. And by the way, there is, and on and on. So the only solution that actually makes sense is having hard money and being pro competition, and then having institutions where if there are a percentage of the population that doesn't want to be on the front line competing for that hard money, then that's fine too. I mean, they can stay home and bake pies. There's no problem with that. We'll create the National Endowment for Pie Baking, and that'll be funded to some degree. And folks can be pie bakers. There's not anything wrong with that. I know I've been baking many pies under lockdown myself. I don't expect to get a subsidy from the government for that, however. But anyway, the point being that, to your point, that to simply look at the death number and say it's because of a vicious dictator is completely out of context, and it's a silly thing to say. It's like saying the bird pooped on my head when I walked out the door. Isn't Trump a dictator? Like, what? I don't get the connection.
So let me say my two thoughts on what I think is going on as well is why our elite media don't want to talk about is our neoliberal economic system. And they don't want to talk about like the food industry and how all the processed food and all the corn syrup and all that sort of stuff in your foods have caused a situation in America whereby 42.4% of US adults are obese. In Vietnam, look at this number, Vietnam. What's their obesity rate? 2.1%. Okay. Vietnam, 2.1% of adults are
so
obese.
That's the context.
This is one of the I could name you a dozen individual contexts to add to this story of what they're not talking about. All they're saying is there's one answer in America, and that is Trump is a fascist dictator. They won't allow you to say any other thing. By the way, like if you actually talk about issues like, is it an obesity issue? You do get, Twitter and Facebook intervene and say, go to the CDC instead. And, they don't want to address the fact they don't want you to ask why are 42.4% of Americans obese versus 2.1% in Vietnam, where they've only had, it's a third of the population of the US, and they've had like 1/5000th of the, or 1/20,000th of the death rate. And then the other issue is that, well, I mean, I think the likes of Maddow and a lot on CNN, as we've covered, they've had editorials. These sort of people that they invite on as guests and experts are championing in the New York Times magazine the notion that we shouldn't have lots of the rights endowed to us through the U.S. Constitution, which is born out of the French Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment, these Enlightenment ideals of rights of man. And they're against a lot of those because of the deplorables that make up too much of the population, and they have a right to vote. They want a more early America where only landholders had votes. They don't want all the deplorable people to have votes. So they don't want to have to discuss that issue of, well, Americans have a lot of freedoms, so we can't stop them. Like
right. That's another contextual point.
Yeah.
Put things in the context.
Yeah.
Right.
So here they tell you Trump is a fascist dictator. He needs to force all Americans to stay in their house and put it, it's like, why would you want to give that power to a fascist dictator?
Right. Exactly. So that's just without any context. So that's one of the remarkable things about this election is that none of the debates are provided with any context
Nothing.
whatsoever. So it just has it's a remarkable void of any context really. So that's another reason why people flock to Bitcoin, because it's mathematically proven. They can look at the chain, it's visible, it's open source, and it has certainty. So if the U.S. both political parties want to play like there's no context for anything, and we're just going to try to have an election that is a farce, then people are going to say, okay, well, I opt out. I vote to go to Bitcoin Nation.
Yeah. And, that time preference issue with Bitcoin that happens to you, that also forces you to seek truth, because you don't have time for the lies that, like, you don't have time for lies of like this disassemblation, like that they won't talk about the obesity issue, for example, and relating to coronavirus. Have you ever seen it on mainstream media? No. You'll see it in some medical journals because they'll note that, basically obesity is, aside from age, like the top two sort of risk factors with COVID-19. So because we can't discuss that, we can't have an honest discussion about, okay, we know that the old, over 80 years old especially, they're like 41% of all deaths in California. So if you're 81, we isolate you, right? But they can't talk about the most of the
This
20.
show is like the opposite of Alex Jones. Like we provide all of the radical truth that no one's talking about, and he provides the radical conspiracy theories that nobody's talking about. You know what I'm saying? Like we just talk
Ooh.
about the facts and the fact-based conversation, like tying obesity to COVID. Just a fact, but according to the mainstream media, that's as radical a conspiracy theory as anything Alex Jones has said. If you just talk about like 2+2=4, according to American mainstream theory and Jack Dorsey, you would be deplatformed for that radical thought. Jack Dorsey knows through his secret decoder ring that 2+2=5. And unless you agree with that, you need to be deplatformed, because it's only based on their view of things, which has no context.
Yeah. And, I'm not saying that we have the absolute truth. What I'm saying is we're just questioning it. It just seems, even look through the newspaper, they'll tell you, oh, look, it's not just, yeah, the young are not immune to COVID.
But is
Okay.
there an Occam's razor explanation?
Yes, there is. But I want to show you. That's what I'm going to say. Occam's razor. So they'll say, like, here's a 20-year-old from North Carolina, and she just died, or he just died. And look, it's not age related. Young people can get too. And then they show a photo, and it's an enormous obese person. And you're like, well,
so that's an Occam's razor type of
but
answer.
they don't mention it in the article that the
it.
person is obese.
Right.
But you could see the person is obese, and they don't discuss, well, is
Okay,
that...
so it's not absolute truth, but there is this concept of Occam's razor, which is that you can solve for a high probability of truth. Right?
Yeah.
So that's what we talk about versus the obesity to COVID in a conspiracy theory context would be that, well, it's, the aliens are making the obesity, right? They go off on this crazy tangent. That would be the conspiracy idea.
Yeah.
And then there's the radical Occam's razor solution, which is that if you can get rid of all the noise, there's an underlying facts and truth of, has a 98 to 99% fidelity to a factual, truthful statement. But that is considered to be unpalatable for the consumer on social media. You get deplatformed for that.
Well, I would like to know the answer. I would like to know the studies. I would like to know, to see those questions presented to the so-called experts who get put on the news. Like Dr. Fauci was in the news this week. And what they try to do and set him up to say is that, indeed, Trump is a fascist dictator and he should lock down everybody. And that's why that will help. They never ask him, what has the data shown you? Okay, over 220,000 Americans have died since the beginning of this crisis of COVID. Is there any sort of numbers? you've seen the numbers, Dr. Fauci. You're the top of the NIH. You have this data. What are you able to tell us? Is it like how many is it elderly? Is it obese? Like, who are the young people dying of it? Is there anything unique about them that you could
So
say?
why doesn't he mention the obese?
Because he's not asked it. He goes on the news and nobody asks him. So I would like, if Kaiser Report or Orange Pill got an opportunity to ask him questions, I would like to ask him about that. And then I would like to ask, why are so many 20-year-olds obese?
Okay, so why isn't he asked about the obese?
Because I think it's a lot to do with, like I said, the same corporation, the corporate food giants, take out a lot of ads on MSNBC and CNN and Fox.
So he's consciously not being asked about the connection to the obese.
I'm not sure if it's consciously, maybe it's subconsciously, maybe they don't. They've bought into the neoliberal corporatized sort of conglomerate run entire ecosystem of our lives and our economies. Maybe they like, their friends run giant agribusinesses and they think they're nice people. And, my friend.
So they're it's misrepresentation.
And cognitive dissonance. They just can't see the truth. They're unable to see it because they know those people. They know those billionaires.
Right.
They know those multimillionaires.
In the U.S., though, that's worked for decades. Until COVID, and then it doesn't work because the COVID is a specific disease that has a death rate that falls right in between having this radical response and not having a response, and it's just eating it into the lies of the culture.
Yeah, and it's so it's that there's other things. There's identity and sort of it's considered. A lot of doctors I read in the UK are not allowed to even tell their patients they're obese anymore because it hurts their feelings. So they could give them the BMI number, but they can't tell them that they're obese. So these you don't want to hurt these people's feelings. But it's across the board. This from the very first moment when this crisis hit. Why did Fauci go on television and say don't buy masks? Because again, our economic system is flawed. He knew for a fact we don't have manufacturing capacity and we can't make masks and we don't have masks. So he saw, he oversees the medical system. He works with doctors and stuff, and he was concerned about his friends who are doctors and in the emergency room. So they needed PPE, they needed personal protection equipment, and he knew that if every American went out and bought whatever remained in the shops, that his friends might die in the emergency room and get COVID. So he's saying, don't buy it. It doesn't work. But why he did that? Because he knows our economic system is flawed and we don't manufacture anything. So there's just.
But is that part of the accepted wisdom? People accept that?
That's something I've presented, and it's he's actually said it now because he's been asked about that, like why he was saying don't use masks, and he said that he was concerned about shortages.
Right, and so, but that is a clear misrepresentation, isn't it?
Well, I think the news, they do 3 minutes of content and then 6 minutes of commercial break, 3 minutes of content, 6 minutes of commercial break. And it's much easier and more captivating. Your audience loves it if you just say it's a fascist dictator in charge. And that's why people are spreading. They don't want to go into the complexities of our economic system, the lack of manufacturing, the high obesity rate caused by our food system. They don't want to go into that.
Because it worked for decades. Until COVID, and that doesn't work anymore. And then now we're going to see a shifting of the guard, the Thucydides trap, as it's mentioned, right? So you have the shifting of power to Asia, to China, just because the U.S. style of doing business, this denial and misrepresentation and catering to corporate interests, worked for decades since World War II. It's generated a lot of wealth, right? A lot of poverty, but nobody talks about that either. So now COVID hit, and it's a very specific disease that hits right in between taking an action and not taking an action. The U.S. is constantly like, well, what do we do? What do we do? It's like, it's very vague. And U.S. doesn't do nuance, right? It's got to be either good or evil, black or white. The U.S. doesn't do nuance very well. And neither does the Europe anymore, apparently. Some countries do. They say, hey, this is evil, and we're going to shut down, and they have a different outcome. So that's it. It's just an interesting turn of events, that the style that supported the U.S. for so long, it doesn't work with COVID. COVID is is to the American lifestyle what Bitcoin is to fiat money, right? So Bitcoin came around and instantly made fiat money, which was already in trouble, instantly worthless, and now it's attacking gold. And COVID comes around, and it's like, wait a minute, that American lifestyle thing, it's actually the way it's hitting it, it's really kind of destroying it. And there's no ability to fight it because all the institutions that were there 50 years ago that could have fought it have been monetized, commoditized, securitized, and
Mm.
put out of business. The U.S. has none of that left anymore. It's just, do we print money or don't print money? And we said when COVID hit, we said every single problem since World War II has been met with money printing, and that's been the solution. Will COVID be the problem that money printing can't solve? And here we are a year later, and it looks like we might not be able to solve this problem by printing money.
Well, the numbers, the actual case numbers are twice as high in Europe, but the US numbers are also high. But our economy is still growing, unlike the European economies, which are shrinking because we can print money because we do have the reserve currency. They don't have a reserve currency. We have a reserve currency. There's nothing at the moment with the current grid of how the monetary system is set up globally to stop us from sending everybody a $200,000 check. Every home could get that and they could go spend it.
Right. And
But
then he puts you in a weird position. Like, I know I've got COVID, but I'm going to get a check from the government. So I don't mind getting COVID.
yeah.
It's like all those people who are falsely on disability. Then they're faking their disabilities because they get free money from the government. So again, it's attacking the psyche of the nation. The nation will be like, well, I know that maybe if I go and get COVID, I'll get free money from the government. So I'll go to this party and not wear a mask. So that because they can print all the money they want. So it's still an open question whether the money printing will be sufficient to carry over the economy until they find a vaccine. The risk is that you don't have that ability to get to the vaccine, and hyperinflation ensues, and you have a collapse of the currency.
So I was going to say as well, my final thoughts for the show is like it's interesting thinking of what we just talked about for the last 56 minutes is that, there's some evidence to me, and I don't know if this is truth or not, but it is something that I feel is that this could be proof of assimilation of our entire history of humans is that, the great powers of the world always rise when they're needed or fall when they have to. So the US, as Max mentioned, since the end of World War II left us the great superpower. But World War II needed the Soviets, like these stubborn slaughterhouse of soldiers going to the front line without any, just an assembly line of slaughter. And then the US, when they came in with Normandy, and you watch those documentaries as we have about it, and it was genuinely like an American, like all the Europeans were like, no, 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 we can't lose again. We're going to be harmed. Like, we can't do this. And, the Americans were just like, let's go in full force. Let's go gigachad, right? Like they assembled this mass assembly of thousands of ships and stuff like that. So they were at the right time. That sort of frontier mentality of Americans, where we can't lose, it was perfect at that time. Here, we still have that mentality of like, yeah, what's this pandemic got to do with us, right? We can't lose. Like, let's just fake it till we make it. But it's obviously harmed the economy, certainly of all our trading partners. Whereas China is the right sort of economy at the right time to zoom in and recover. They're the best performing economy in 2020.
I agree.
So that's why I think it might be a simulation. Like this, it's weird how it's like the writers are like watching the story unfold, and then they introduce a nation or a culture or peoples and say, okay, this is what we need to get to the next level.
Yeah, to get power up, to get a power up. To China is the next layer in the global humanity simulation game.
Well, it was fun microdosing with all you gigachads out there, and chads and microchads, and it's okay to be a microchad. One day you'll be a gigachad by world standards. If you're in Bitcoin at this time, even if you have 17,000 satoshis and not 17,000 Bitcoin, you one day will be a gigachad.
Exactly. Keep stacking.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.
I'm going to end the stream. And